Welcome to this session of Online Communist Forum, organized by the Communist Party of Great Britain. Our speaker tonight is Moshé Machover. Very difficult day for those of us who are anticipating with great horror possible attack by Israel on Iran in the next couple of days. But it's important to look at things beyond the immediate news or headline news. And that's why I'm very pleased to see the title of Moshé Machover's talk, What's Really Behind the War in the Middle East? Moshé, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, comrades. Yes, as Yasmin just said, I mean, events are moving very fast, and I assume that most people are following the news, so I'm not going to comment on the news. I want to speak about what is really behind the war in the Middle East, or the multifaceted war in the Middle East, several wars going on at the same time. I'm going to start with a spoiler. If you haven't got time to listen to the whole of my talk and you want to just the bottom line, the short answer is what is behind of the wars in the Middle East is the twin strategic aims of Israel, and that includes the present Israeli government, but it's not just the present Israeli government, it's the long-term strategic aims of the Israeli government. And I want to focus on two of these essential, all-important aims, long-term strategic aims. The first one is ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and annexation of the remaining parts of the, quote, promised land, unquote. That's strategic aim number one. And strategic aim number two is establishing and reinforcing Israeli regional hegemony. Okay. Now, these are as it were, the bottom line, the conclusion that I'm going to drive at. And now for the details. The question is how to examine Israel's aid. Most commentators look at episodes. The most superficial ones start from recent episodes, like the 7th of October last year. That's what the starting point. These are the real cheats, the ones who are actually spewing Israeli propaganda. Their interpretation starts as if the whole world in the Middle East, the whole conflict in the Middle East started with the assault, with the attack of Hamas on Israel on the 7th of October last year. The better commentator starts from further back, from, let's say, from the June War of 1967. Some of the more sort of thoroughgoing ones start from even further back, 1948. But this is the wrong way of looking at it. Let me quote where this kind of view, that kind of approach leads you. I'm quoting from the Guardian editorial on Israel's war in Lebanon of the 1st of October, this year, a few days ago, 1st of October, the Guardian editorial. Otherwise, a very good editorial, actually. But then it goes on to say, Benjamin Netanyahu appears to have no long-term plan in mind, no clear strategy for an exit. This is a conclusion that you come to if you look at this episode individually, out of its location in a historical context, a chain of not episode after episode, but a chain of evolution of events since the beginning, as well, even the beginning of the Zionist project of colonization. The commentators, even the better ones, look at each war as a separate item, a separate episode, and they ask, what is the end game of this war? What is the end game of this war? As if this war has its own isolated end game. What is the exit strategy? What I'm going to try to do is to go to first principles. Look at the fundamental nature of the Zionist colonization project. And from examining these first principles, we can make some important deductions. Because Israel acts in each episode with a view to advance its long-term strategic aim. And therefore, we can predict quite a lot with high probability. Of course, you cannot predict everything with any certain confidence. There are, of course, contingencies, but the main outline of the unfolding strategy follows from the fundamental principles of the underlying Israeli Zionist colonization project right from its beginning. So first principle number one, we have to start, and this is something that I keep repeating every time that I speak about this situation, about the conflict in the Middle East, because it is a fundamental key to understanding the nature of Zionist colonization. The Zionist model of colonization is not the same, is not similar to that of South Africa. A lot of people are confused by the true recognition that what you have in the Israel and its occupied territories is a kind of apartheid. And apartheid recalls South Africa. And in any case, the colonial conflict that most people remember from their own lifetime is the one in South Africa, because this is the most recent one. Older people may remember Algeria, the decolonization of Algeria. They remember the decolonization of South Africa. And they make analogies. They are also, I think, led a little bit astray by the academic description of both South African colonization and Zionist colonization of Palestine as settler colonialism. This is in the academic post-colonial discourse, the usual way of describing, and they put Zionist colonization in South Africa under a common heading, as if they were of the same kind. But this is not at all true. In this context, I think we should apply a Marxist analysis of colonialism. And here, the key to understanding the nature of a colonial conflict is the political economy of the colonial state. The mode of production, if you like. Who is doing the major part of direct production. Who are the main direct producers? And if you look at South Africa, you will see that in South Africa under apartheid, as now, the major direct production was being done by the indigenous people, not by the settlers. The settlers did some of the direct production. Mostly they were in a situation of exploiters or other classes that are not engaged in direct material production. The main direct production was done by the indigenous people. This is not the same at all as in the case of Zionist colonization of Palestine. If you like a comparison, the more opposite comparison is not with South Africa, but in Australia, with Australia or with North America. And therefore, what we should be looking at is the process of colonization as it unfolded in Australia or in North America, in the United States, for example. And you will see that since the indigenous people were not needed as exploitable labor power, they were surplus to requirement. And the colonizers, rather than exploiting their labor power, focused on getting rid of them by various means, various forms of ethnic cleansing. And this, of course, is a very long process. Most people who think nowadays about colonization don't have in mind these old forms of colonization. The Zionist case is, as it were, an anachronism. It started doing in the 20th century, more or less, what was completed in Australia and in North America long ago. The process in the United States, known as the Indian Wars, which was the conflicts, the individual episodes of the conflict which resulted in the part extermination and other forms of ethnic cleansing of the indigenous people, is known as Indian Wars. This took the better part of 3 centuries. It started, if you look at the Wikipedia under this heading, the Indian Wars are supposed to have started in the early 17th century and ended not long before the end of the 19th century. The dates given in the Wikipedia is 1609 to 1890. That's the better part of 3 centuries. It took a long time. It's a long process. In Australia, because of the conditions were very different, because the indigenous people were in a mode of, originally in a mode of production much more ancient than those in North America. It took somewhat less, about a bit more than 120 years, but nevertheless, it took a very long time. It's not something that is done in a short span of time. It is a long process, and it is a process that is composed of many individual episodes. The Indian Wars were not one episode, one occurrence, one event. They were a chain of events. And if you look at an individual Indian war and you ask, what is the end game of this war? What is the exit strategy, as it were? This is more or less a meaningless question, because you can't look at each of the Indian wars of the United States, or before the creation of the United States, and the colonizers, British colonizers of North America. If you look at it individually, it does. You don't get a sense of where it is all leading to. You have to see it as part of a long-term process. Now, if you look at the Zionist colonization of the so-called Promised Land, you could see that it is now more or less in the middle of this process. The long-term aim is Jewish, well-established majority in the totality of this Promised Land, which is, at the very least, the territory between the river and the sea, to use a convenient description. But it may actually denote a little bit more than that. People forget about the Israeli annexation of bits of Syria in the Golan Heights, which are also absorbed, ethnically cleansed of its majority of its Syrian Arab population, and given to Israeli settlers to colonize. So what we are looking at is a whole continuum of attempts to get rid of the Palestinian Arabs and annex the territory of the Palestine. Now, of course, this process is requires, or is optimally done from the point of view of the colonizers in a situation of crisis, in a war. Typically, ethnic cleansing is something that is done in a process, in conditions of a war. So this means that the Zionist project before 1948 and the Israeli state since 1948 are in a situation of quasi-permanent war. Now, these war episodes can be initiated by Israel completely unprovoked, or it can come as they can come as a response to an apparent provocation or to a real provocation. It can come as a surprise. I mean, if you look at the two extremes, the war of 1956, about which people don't talk very much, I will return to it and its importance later on. The 1956 Suez War was initiated by Israel and France and Britain out of the blue. It was their own initiative. It was not a response to any warlike provocation of Egypt or anybody else. It was a premeditated war plot by these three countries. Or it can come as a response to a seeming threat of war, as in 1967, where Israel responded to what it depicted, or what appears to be a threat of attack by Egypt, but in reality was not so. Israel acted in its own propaganda as an act of preempting a war, but the reality was, as it transpired later on, that it was not in any danger of being attacked at the time. Or it can come as a real surprise, as it did in 7th of October 1923. But in each case, whether it was a premeditated or a deliberate provocation by Israel or a response to an attack by others on it, the conduct of the war was always bent towards achieving the fundamental aims of Israeli Zionist strategy. So I think we should look at the current war or bunch of wars that are going on as a chain in the event, as an event in the long chain of wars that are aimed, among other things, to complete the ethnic cleansing of Palestine and to annex the territory of the whole of Palestine to Israel. This we can predict, and this is the nature, one of the underlying strategies driving the present war. Now, this can be predicted, and we can predict that this will go on, and Israel will go forward in this line of action. That is to say, attempt to accomplish ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and annexation of territory. Will Israel, so this we can predict with virtual certainty. Of course, nothing can be predicted with absolute certainty, but I think with a high degree of probability, we can predict that much. What cannot be predicted with any degree of certainty is whether Israel will succeed in completing this work in progress, the work in progress of colonizing Palestine and establishing a Jewish supremacist, Jewish majority state there. This is still an open question. The historical examples which I cited, namely North America and Australia, point in the direction of success. Both of them were eventually successful in accomplishing the end result of ethnic cleansing and subduing, reducing the indigenous people to minorities that are incapable of retrieving their original homeland. Whether Israel will succeed in accomplishing this aim is still an open question. There are some factors that are acting against it. First of all, we are not in the 18th or 19th century, we are in the 21st century. Things are different. There is a much greater weight, not enough, but still some weight to world public opinion, especially outside the imperialist countries. Moreover, in both North America and Australia, the colonizers faced a pre-modern isolated society divided into many ethnic groups. In Palestine, the indigenous Palestinian Arabs are a single modern national formation. They are a nation. And moreover, this nation is part of a larger national formation, the pan-Arab nation of the Middle East. That is quite different from what the situation was in North America and in Australia. You had many different ethnic groups, and they were not part of a larger modern national formation in a surrounding. They were isolated. In other words, The indigenous people of Australia were isolated in Australia. They were not part of a larger continuum of affine or related nations. So far, unlike North America and Australia, Zionist project has not managed to swamp the indigenous population by immigration also. In the case of both Australia and North America, there was huge mainly European immigration of settlers that managed numerically to swamp the indigenous people. This is quite different in Palestine. Palestine was not an attractive destination for immigration. It did not attract a huge number of immigration. And in any case, the Zionist project was only interested in Jewish immigration. So the potential reserve of immigrants was quite small. And indeed, what it got, the immigration that the Zionist project were able to attract for its project were mainly Jews who were either ideologically motivated or who had no other choice. But this was not enough so far to swamp the indigenous people as they occurred in the two historical examples that I've cited. Okay, this is first principle number one, the first strategic aim of Zionist colonization that I wanted to refer to. And notice that it follows from the genome of Zionism, that is to say, from the original nature of the kind of colonization that we are talking about. It is not something incidental, it is part of the, as it were, genome of Zionist colonization, the kind of mode of production that it was based on. I'm coming to the second first principle that, or axiom that I wanted to mention. And it also follows from the unique nature of Zionist colonization, something that, as far as I know, has no counterpart in the history of colonization. And that is that Zionist colonization, in Zionist colonization, the colonists, the settlers had no metropole. If you look now at the two cases that I've taken for comparison, which are in other ways appropriate comparisons, both Australia and North America, in those two cases, the settlers were mostly citizens of a metropole, in this case Britain, that sent them to colonize those territories and protected them and defended them and provided the backup and the military might that was required in the colonization process. Zionist colonization is unique, as far as I can tell, as far as I know, in the settlers having no metropole. They did not have a mother country that sent them there. They needed a surrogate mother. And the surrogate mother, right from the beginning, and you can see this right in the early writings of the early leaders of the Zionist project, just as you can see that they are envisaging and foreshadowing the ethnic cleansing of the indigenous population, they are also talking about the way to compensate for the absence of the mother country. The way to obtain, as it were, a surrogate mother is to make a deal with a dominant empire that was present in the Middle East. The Zionist project and its state are in effect from the beginning part of the imperialist franchise. They had to, as it were, acquire a franchise from the leading empire that dominated the region at any given time. So, as it were, the Zionist state is acting under license as a franchise of the leading hegemonic empire in the Middle East. How can you describe this? To say that the Zionist state or the Zionist project before the creation of the State of Israel is a mercenary formation is not quite correct. Mercenary has the connotation of being, as it were, passive, as it were, sort of soldiers that do what they are told by whoever hired them. This is not quite the case with the Zionist project. It is proactive, more like quasi-independent contractor of services to the world hegemon. In this capacity, it is striving for monopoly of this being the franchise holder in this region. That is to say, trying to be the sole contractor in the region in which it is located. And hence the strategic aim, which is the second strategic aim I'm focusing about in this talk, of striving for regional hegemony. I'm quoting here from a description that I saw, which is by Michael Karagis. I can't actually recall where he is. This is something he recently said, but I haven't noted the exact place. Maybe you can find it on the internet. But the quote from Michael Karagis, I think, is very important, very appropriate. Here it is. The US may have preferred Netanyahu didn't blow up Lebanon because US doesn't need deterrence from Hezbollah or from Iran. But by demonstrating its incredible deterring power, Israel shows the United States its potential future use as a good investment. That is to say, if the big mafia boss wants to find a local franchise holder for himself, then the best bid you can make for getting this franchise is to show that you are the sole boss, the sole mafioso in your specific sub area. The contract of being a subcontractor will go to the fiercest, the strongest, the most aggressive bidder for that role. So I'm coming again to look at the various wars that Israel was engaged in. All of the wars were used or were tried to be used to not only accomplish ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, but to assert or reinforce Israel's regional hegemony. This is true of all the wars that I've mentioned so far, certainly true of 1948, it's true of the war of 1967, the June War of 1967. But here I want to focus on a war which remarkably is very little discussed nowadays, and that is the Suez War of 1956. People hardly mention it. In my opinion, it is a very interesting war to look at. It is, I think, neglected because somehow it seems not to have succeeded. It failed. And, the three colluders in this war, Israel, Britain, and France, had to withdraw after a fairly short time. Israel occupied the Gaza Strip at that time and was mulling over the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip even then, but had no time to accomplish it. It briefly annexed the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip, but was soon forced by the United States to withdraw. So, as it were, nothing came out of it. But this is very deceptive. First of all, I want you to listen to a project, a plan that the Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, presented to the secret meeting which was held by the three plotters, Britain, France, and of course Israel, in their secret meeting at Sèvres, which is a town not far from Paris, or one of in the outskirts of Paris. The date is 22nd of October, 1956. I'm quoting from the minutes of this secret meeting. The minutes were supposed to be destroyed, but somehow a copy was preserved and was published by the Israeli historian Avi Schleim. I think this is one of the most brilliant things he wrote. I'll give you the exact reference if you like later on. But here is what he says about, and I'm quoting, Ben-Gurion presented a comprehensive plan, which he himself called fantastic, for the reorganization of the Middle East. Jordan, he observed, was not viable as an independent state and should therefore be divided. Iraq would get remember, in 1956, Jordan consisted both of the East Bank and of the West Bank that is now under Israeli occupation. But Jordan, he says, should be divided. Iraq would get the East Bank of the Jordan, that is to say, what is now the Kingdom of Jordan. In return, I continue the quote, in return for a promise to settle the Palestinian refugees there and to make peace with Israel, while the West Bank would be attached to Israel as a semi-autonomous region. That's not all. Lebanon suffered from having a large Muslim population which was concentrated in the south. The problem could be solved by Israel's expansion up to the Litani River. If you look at the Litani, the part of the Litani that goes from east to west is about 30 kilometers north of the present Israeli-Lebanese border, and it has been occupied previously by Israel in previous Israeli-Lebanese wars. So I continue the quote. The problem could be solved by Israel's expansion up to the Litani River, thereby helping to turn Lebanon into a more compact Christian state. The Suez Canal area should be given an international status, while the Strait of Tiran in the Gulf of Aqaba should come under Israeli control to ensure freedom of navigation. A prior condition for realizing this plan was the elimination of Nasser and the replacement of his regime with a pro-Western government, which would also be prepared to make peace with Israel. End of quote. It comes from the Protocol Observer, an article, Anatomy of a War Plot, by an article by Avi Schleim, which was published in the journal International Affairs in 1997. That quote itself, of course, the protocol was written in October 1956. So you see, what is now going on is not new. It is part of a long-term design that was not invented by Netanyahu or by his government, that Israel has been entertaining for yonks. Look at it, this war happened in 1956. I don't know how many of the people listening to my talk remember this or can remember it. Many of them were probably not born yet. For my part, I can say that it is not only, I think, a very interesting episode in the history of the Middle East and in the chain of Israeli wars aimed in the long run at accomplishing the two strategic aims. But for me personally, it was a crucial event that opened my eyes to the nature of the Zionist project. So the Israeli-Lebanon wars of 1982 and 2006 to some extent are echoes of what Ben-Gurion said in 1956, and what is taking place nowadays should also be looked at in this light, not of the short-term end strategy of the short-term end strategy of the Israel in this war, or for exit strategy, what the commentators focus on, but in light of the long-term strategic aims of Israel in the region. In this connection, I would like to add that what is being revealed is that the Israeli attack on Hezbollah that started with the spectacular events of the 17th of September, recent events with the pagers and so on, are not a short-term occurrence that Israel just thought of on the spur of the moment. It has been long in preparation. In fact, Israel was preparing this attack as the investigation of the Washington Post and others have indicated. This war has been in preparation for many years, long before the 7th of October 1923. So the attack on Hezbollah, first of all, in order to accomplish Israeli aims in Lebanon itself, and as an opening to acquiring hegemony in the Middle East, which requires downgrading the position of Iran. This was a long time in preparation. In fact, some commentators have rightly indicated that Israel was so concerned, so occupied, the Israeli planners and strategists were so concerned with planning an attack of Hezbollah as an opening to a war with Iran, that they forgot to look at what is happening in the Gaza Strip, and therefore they were taken by surprise in October last year because they were focusing on Lebanon and as an opening for a regional war with Iran. So ironically, contrary to what seems to be the case, that the war with Hezbollah came as a consequence of the war of Israel, the genocidal war with of Israel in Gaza. This may be true in a short-term perspective, but in fact, if you look at it in the longer term, it is the opposite. Will Israel succeed in this bid? Again, what you can say is, you can say what the strategic aims are, but whether Israel will succeed in obtaining its desired aim, this is something that I would not like to predict. There are all sorts of factors of uncertainty, including the fragility of Israeli society itself. So I make no predictions about the possible outcome of this war. This is still an open question. But I think I've tried to concentrate on the way to look at the large scale, the long-term trend of what is going on. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, comrades. That was quite a lot to think about. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. We have a situation where we now move the large number of our attendees to become panelists so that they can ask questions. Sorry, I'm also yeah, Tina, if you can hear me, you have to stop the live stream. Sorry about that. I'm no longer capable of doing that because you're host. Okay, I will start by moving the attendees who want to ask questions, but let me start myself by asking a couple of questions. You rightly point out this regional hegemonic ambitions of Israel, and that's a very important point. What I couldn't understand was his message last Monday to the Iranian people. Clearly, the Islamic Republic, paralyzed by sanctions, is very good for Israel, I would have thought, because one of its two rivals in the region, is completely isolated, can't do much, can't progress in terms of what he was calling internet advances, computing advances, and so on. So what is behind this message? I don't know if you heard it. I'm sure you heard it, but it's a long message in which he actually says, if you get rid of the Islamic Republic and bring back the idiot Shah's son, I mean, he doesn't say it in so many words, but that's what he's implying, regime change from above, then you will achieve technological progress. Yeah. And in some ways, that is, even in his own logic, that doesn't make sense. So maybe I didn't understand him, or something was wrong there. And in general, I think one of the other points about what he's trying to do, this dividing Iranians as Persians against Arabs, is an extremely worrying development. It's a kind of, I would have thought, a racist type of division. In terms of trying to say Arabs, Palestinians are one lot, our Hebrew nation and the Persians, because Kurosh supported This wasn't in his speech, but it has been in other speeches. Cyrus the Great defended the Jews, that this is some kind of new alliance we can use. So I wondered if you could address these, what to me seemed quite contradictory and at times silly comments. So I'm moving people who can speak. I think Tony was the first. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. I'll take 2 or 3 and then bring you in, Moshé. Is that okay?
Yes, that's okay.
Thanks very much.
Right, yeah, thank you, Moshé. I mean, I don't think we're in any major disagreement. Just to say on the Suez, which you highlight as an important war, which today doesn't go noticed. I think the important thing and the most remarkable thing compared to today is that Eisenhower gave instructions not just to Britain and France, of course, but to Israel to get out of the territories it had conquered, namely Sinai and Gaza. That would be unthinkable today. So what we've seen over the last half a century or more is a much closer alignment with the United States. And an American president today can draw up red lines, as Biden has done, and then Israel simply goes and tramples over them, and those red lines disappear as if they never existed. So there is a qualitative change, in a sense, in the US-Israeli strategic relationship. And there doesn't seem to be much sign that it's going to diminish. In fact, it would be difficult to think of anything that Israel could do which the United States would object to and actually back it up with, for instance, the freezing of arms sales. I mean, bear in mind, even as right-wing and gung-ho an American president as Reagan froze the transfer of weapons. So we've seen a growing, if you like, alliance with the United States for all that that means. And I think that is quite important in terms of what imperialism strategy is in the Middle East, because it now seems to rest primarily on the Israeli state to an extent that it didn't in the past. Just really a small thing. I mean, you said that Israel is unique in that its settler colonials didn't have a mother country, but this argument is often used by some to actually say that Israel isn't a genuine settler colonial state. And I reject that. Settler colonialism isn't where you come from, but what you're doing now. And so it is, in a sense, almost irrelevant. But South Africa didn't really have a mother country. The Afrikaners, the majority of the settlers who come primarily, but not exclusively, from the Netherlands, didn't have an imperialist backer after Britain replaced the Netherlands. I think it was around 1796, sometime around there. So they didn't need to. And in any case, what we saw, of course, in what were termed the White Dominions was a rebellion against the mother country. And of course, Israel was prime in that. It switched horses after Britain was unable to agree to facilitate the emergence of a state. But I think the important thing is how we assess what is happening today. Because, of course, the question of Iran possessing a nuclear weapon has always been a distraction from the real question, which is that Iran poses a threat to Israeli hegemony, and whether that threat has been defeated. Israel is at the moment, of course, weighing up its response to the Iranian missile attack, which I think was more successful than Israel is letting on. At the same time, we've seen certainly a very severe setback for Hezbollah, both in the assassination of its whole leadership and the pager attacks. in my view, I mean, Israel was planning the next war after 2006. That was its major goal, and of course, and as you say, it took its eyes off Gaza. The question is whether it can succeed in Lebanon. We don't know the actual state of play inside Hezbollah and whether it has access to and is able to coordinate, for instance, the launching of the 200,000 or so missiles it's reputed to have. But my own view is, for what it's worth, is that the key battle will be on the ground. And the question is whether Israel will suffer a defeat on the ground to the extent that it did in 2006. That is an open question, but the opening salvos in that war have begun, and Israel already seems to have had quite considerable numbers of casualties. And I suspect that Israel is not going to be able to achieve that which it wants, which would be conquering up to the Litani, the establishment of settlements, which is what Ben Gvir and Smotrich want, etc. And you mentioned, of course, the 1956 Sevres Agreement, but that wasn't just in the Sevres Agreement. I mean, I'm sure you've read Livia Rothkach's Israel's Sacred Terror, Moshe Sharet's diaries, detailed the various bizarre plans of Ben Gurion, Dayan, Lavon, and so on. So, I mean, this is nothing new, but Israel's, if you like, desires to re-engineer and shape the Middle East are one thing. Its ability to do so is quite another thing. And that's, of course, notwithstanding the internal divisions within Israel between those who would like to normalize the state and those who have messianic dreams which extend to the land of Israel in its full biblical sense. So we shall see. But the real question today is, what is the strength of the opposition? Because Iran is clearly an opponent. It is clearly afraid, it's tentative, but nonetheless, it did launch a very severe attack. And it is quite possible that an Israeli attack on Iran will then draw in by default other countries, not least if Iran's oil facilities were taken out. It may well then take out other oil facilities, sending the price of oil sky high, which is exact opposite of what the United States wants. So I throw out those observations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tony. I'll ask Ben Cousins and then you can come back, Moshé. Is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Yasmin. Am I audible?
Yep.
Great. I'd like to make a comment about the purported change in US geostrategic position between the early and mid-50s and the current conjuncture. In the early and mid-50s, the US was committed to a deeply felt, and of course totally fraudulent, but deeply felt anti-colonialist rhetoric. And of course, it still had ambitions to replace Britain and France as major hegemonic powers across not only the Middle East. It succeeded. So the contrasts that are being made, I think, are partial, and the US. I mean, I hesitate to quote the Guardian as a source, but within the last week, the Guardian has voiced doubts as to whether the US is really deeply committed to Israel as its attack dog in the Middle East, and wouldn't the Arab sort of semi-feudalist powers, don't want to debate that, the emirs and such like, and the Saudi royals, wouldn't be a better bet for US imperialism. So I think the broad contrast that's been drawn about US-Israel bond now simply closer than it was is a bit misleading. My second point, I'll try and be brief. In the longer term, I think we're all agreed that Israel must be and must be seen as a non-viable and unstable entity, and all to the benefit of the Palestinians in particular, and perhaps even the Druze. And the peoples of Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. And this seems to depend on the possibility of weaning the Jewish Israeli working class away from the Zionist project. Yet, increasingly, the mode of production, high tech, in particular in Israel, seems to be pretty heavily dependent on selling the means of mainly internal repression to pretty well every reactionary power it can find. And I suspect that quite a lot of the Jewish Israeli working class is well aware of this. And it is a serious objection to the long-held thesis that Israel can be divided and a socialist or at least democratic federation, Jews, Arabs in particular, of the Levant can be created. I'm not at all happy about this situation. Who could be? But I fear that what has been a trump card in what I'll loosely call CPGB, PCC theory is starting to look weak. The permanent war economy with Israel as a leading prophet of pan-world nationalisms, and the more in conflict they are, the better, because that means Israel can flog its machinery of death to both sides. I'm sure this is a notion which has occurred to the likes of Ben Gvir, Smotrich, and the keener intellects in the Israeli establishment. Please address these worries. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Moshe. I'll let you answer because three people.
Okay, there were several very important points. First of all, the Netanyahu speech. This is obviously propaganda. Propaganda aimed at not just the Iranian people to whom, or the Persian people to whom it was nominally addressed. It was aimed at the Israeli public. It was aimed at the United States. It was aimed at the world arena. But the reality behind it is that Iran at the moment poses a real obstacle to total Israeli hegemony in the region. It is true that it is not a very powerful country. I mean, compared to Israeli war machine, compared to the support that Israel has from the United States. But it is a serious obstacle. And I think I indicated in my talk that Israel wants not only hegemony, but exclusive hegemony, exclusive role as a local subcontractor. Whereas the United States might, at some juncture, find it in its own interest to come to some kind of accommodation with Iran, and I'm sure that the Iranian regime would be prepared to make an accommodation with the United States. In fact, the new Iranian president made some remarks in this direction. This would be poison for Israel because it would mean that it has not exclusive franchise in the region. In this respect, the plan of dividing Iran into several parts is classical. This idea is not new, but this is a way of excluding Iran for a long term from being of any importance in the region. So I think this should be taken seriously. That is to say, if Israel manages to pull the United States to accompany in a war against Iran, and if it succeeds, it may well be that the outcome would be a division of Iran into 3 or 4 parts, just as, to give the analogy of the Ukrainian war, part of the long-term aim proposed by US strategies, beginning with Brzezinski in the 1990s, the strategic advisor of Carter. In his seminal book, he actually does raise the idea of dividing Russia into several bits, the better to dominate and to exclude it as an obstacle to American hegemony. So this is classical. Coming to Tony's remark about Eisenhower, I think this is completely off the wall. It ignores the history of what actually happened in '56. Tony, you may not remember it, but at that time, Israel was not an American client. It was a French client. The supplier of arms to the Israeli military and the warplanes that Israel used in the Suez War were French Misters, not American airplanes. The position of Eisenhower vis-a-vis the Suez War was aimed not so much at Israel, but at Britain and France. Please, I mean, don't try to play games, and don't try to take the initiative without consulting the real world hegemon. Eisenhower did not so much oppose the aims of the war as such. Indeed, the United States later supported this, but it was scandalized by Britain and France trying to rise beyond their true position. Indeed, the Suez War was the last attempt of Britain to act independently of the United States. Since then, Britain has absorbed the message and has acted as a true American poodle. So to give the position of Eisenhower as an example of the change in American position vis-a-vis Israel is to argue in contrary to historical facts. This was a position that Eisenhower took vis-a-vis France, which was then the real sponsor of Israel. Israel was subcontractor of France in relation to the Algerian war and so on. Israel also got the message. Israel got the message of not playing games with a second-rate imperialist power, but making a deal with the United States. And this was sealed after the Suez War and just before the June War of 1967. So that is the true history of the and this is also a reply to Ben's first remark. Also, I think Tony reverts to his usual mistake of comparing Israel with South Africa. It's true that South Africa did not have a mother country after the Dutch withdrew from there. But we are not comparing like with like. I'm talking about comparing Zionist colonization with that of North America and Australia. And there they had a mother country, which Israel didn't have. It's a totally different situation. You can't compare Zionist colonization with South Africa. It is a constant mistake that I'm afraid Tony reverts to. As for Ben's remark about the role of the Israeli working class, I don't think there is any possible chance of the Israeli working class rebelling or rising against Zionist colonization in the present circumstances, that is to say, in the context of a capitalist region. The Israeli working class has not much to gain from leaving Zionism, and which would mean degrading its position from an exploited class with national privilege to an exploited class without national privilege. The situation could change this position of the Israeli working class could change. This is a possibility. Of course, nothing is certain, but the only possibility for the Israeli working class to come out against the Zionist regime is in the context of a socialist upheaval in the region, in which case the Israeli working class would have the prospect of exchanging its position of an exploited class with national privileges to a class without national privileges, but being a partner in a regional working class domination. That is to say, being part of the ruling class of the region. This is a mere possibility, logical possibility. I'm not saying that this is what is going to happen. It may well be that, for example, the Zionist project of colonization will fulfill its aim, will actually manage to reach the conclusion of its aim of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians long before any possible resolution can come about.
Thanks very much, Moshe. I have 4 at least in this thing in the list. I hope we can get back to some of these. Siamak Mer, go ahead, Siamak. You can open your camera or just use audio, up to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Comrade Moshé, and for the organizers. Very good talk. And my question is actually maybe not directly related to your talk, but about a rationale that we keep hearing from Iranian left, that obviously, I mean, there are some left, like I'm talking about, for instance, Communist Workers' Communist Party of Iran, that for a long time now, that they felt that actually attacking Iran by Israel, one might even, it's just a bit ridiculous, but I'm still asking this question, that it might even open up some space for the huge discontent that is in Iran and able them to basically organize or against the Islamic regime or create opportunities on the ground for workers' movements and other, women's movements to be able to finally topple Iranian regimes. We've heard that, but it's very interesting. In the recent months, I've been starting to hear from other groups like of Iranian left about this, and Russia basically going that it's Israel is smart enough not to carpet bomb Iran they know they're smart enough, they will create enough problems for the regime so that the population uh, will be able to have that space that I just mentioned to organize and hopefully eventually topple the Iranian regime. I just wanted to hear your, obviously, I find this very ridiculous, and I know that Comrade Yasmin has written several articles about this, but I just wanted to hear from you, what is your opinion on this? And if you already have mentioned about this, you just can refer me to that, and you don't have to answer it. But basically, that's my question. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to ask Amira. Your hand fell, but you were before the other three, so I'll ask you to speak, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'll be short. Hi, Moshé. Thanks for
Hi.
the talk. And two small questions. One is I missed the last sentence. You said something about the preference or what comes first with Gaza and Lebanon, and I missed that bit. If you could go back to it. And the second question is about Saudi Arabia. Where does it fit in this competition for hegemony? Thank you.
Very good question. In fact, when I was talking of hegemony, I was thinking of Saudi Arabia.
I'm still bothered by your remark about the flights.
Yeah, sorry. Adam Schills, it's your turn. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good morning, comrades. My name is Adam Schills. I'm a member of the International Socialism Project in Chicago. I'd like to ask two questions to Moshé this morning. The first question is on the West Bank. Let me explain what I mean. A year ago, after October 7th, the Zionist project had momentum. It had a forward surge. That surge has waned somewhat in the past year. The inability to militarily formalize control over Gaza, the hostage movement in Israel, dissatisfaction from international ruling classes, the Palestine Solidarity Movement. The project needed a new jumpstart, a new reboot, a new resurge. And it seems to me that what's occurred with the pager attacks, Nasrallah's assassination, the bombings of Dahlia, is a reinvigoration of the momentum of October 7th, and Zionism having a shot in the arm, if you like, for its project of a third Nakba, 47, 67, and now today. And it would seem in that context, the West Bank would be the indicated center of attention for Zionist activity. We used to say, speaking of the Egyptian proletariat, the road to Jerusalem goes through Cairo. I wonder if for Zionism today, the road to Nablus and Jericho goes through or up to the Litani River. My second question is this. Half a century ago, Moshé, you and Jabra Nicola formulated an incredibly important set of theses in Matt's pen on the unified nature of the Arab nation, the question of the necessity of a permanent revolution, or as you just said in answer to another comrade, a socialist perspective for the region, a red Middle East, as Noel and I used to call it in our youth, and the with self-determination for the oppressed minorities, the Jewish Israeli people, the Kurds, the Southern Sudanese, in that framework. It's now been half a century since Matt's pen developed those theses. In my opinion, they've stood up incredibly well. But I wanted to ask you now, looking on with such a period of time, our theory doesn't stand still. We're not dogmatists. What updating or modification or if any, would you make to the theory after half a century of experience? Thank you very much, comrades.
Thanks very much. That was very useful. If it's allowed, I'm going to ask the other two to speak as well, Moshé. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah, Mike McNair, and then yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this is, as it were, a series of points, mainly to Moshé. Does the Zionist project have a mother country? I'm not quite sure that it doesn't. It seems to me that in to a considerable extent, it's has become the case that its mother country is the United States, that its primary source of colonists is source of colonists provided by the United States, that its cultural development has become very much United States dominated cultural development. The Eisenhower point, my understanding is that actually there was a very sharp change of opinion by the Kennedy administration. That although the Six-Day War was still fought with French kit, in reality, the United States had already decided under the Kennedy administration that it would guarantee what later came to be called Israel's qualitative military edge over its neighbors. And I think that it becomes the case, and certainly now it seems to me, it's very difficult to regard the Israeli state as anything other than a direct settler colony of the United States of America. There's some analogy you referred to, and I think usefully to the fact that there's a sense in which the Israeli colonization project is very old-fashioned. There's a sense in which there's a useful analogy with the Marcher Lords, who engaged in settler colonialism of Wales at the edges of Anglo-Norman England, and indeed continued to be theoretically autonomous and irritatingly autonomous down to the year 1536 when they were incorporated. My understanding, there's a question which was posed, why does the United States continue to back Israel? And why does it continue to back Israel under the present circumstances? I think the answer to that was given to us by General Michael Kurilla giving evidence to the US House of Representatives rather more than a year ago. He said, by our deployments in the Middle East, we have our hands on the throat of the Chinese economy. So the point is not, the US is not actually concerned with the high price of oil. The high price of oil is very advantageous to the United States fracking industry and to US onshore oil and to US Alaskan oil and so on and so forth. The US has different periods of time where it's advantageous to it for the price of oil to go up, it's advantageous to it for the price of oil to go down. Its presence, the presence of the State of Israel gives the United States the ability to turn the taps on, to turn the taps off, as the case may be. And for that purpose, it's actually, Israel is the best, even if it was not the sole hegemon, even if it was in competition with Turkey, for example, which one can easily imagine Israel being in competition with Turkey for hegemony over the Middle East. It would still be the case that Israel cannot can diss the United States, but it cannot break with the fundamental interests of the United States, and it can't do so because it can't have a normalized relationship with the other countries in the region. It can't have a normalized relationship with the other countries in the region precisely for the reason that Moshé has given, that this is colonizing project of the sort which drives the natives out. But the natives in this case, you're talking about 5 million Israelis trying to drive out 200 million Arabs. It's as if Germany set up a settler colony in California and tried to hold off the rest of the United States. Except, of course, that you need to have it's the United States, which is the backup. That finally, Moshe's second series of points about breaking up. This was the policy of the British government in relation to breaking up Gran Colombia in Latin America in the 1820s, and it was the policy of the British government, what the British government expected to get from the Russian Revolution and planned for at least 2 years after the Russian Revolution, was to break up the former Tsarist Empire into a large number of smaller territories which could be better controlled. So I think it's a sort of, in that sense, we're still in the game, in that sort of game. That's it.
Thanks very much, Mike. We have Ian Spencer, and then I'll get you back, Moshe, if that's okay. Ian, go ahead.
I simply wanted to ask a question about the lack of action of the Lebanese army, that is the official state army of Lebanon, as opposed to Hezbollah. One would have thought that, whether this is considered a war between Hezbollah and Israel, the government of Lebanon would want to protect its borders, but maybe I'm missing something. I just wanted to ask that simple question. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Moshe, it's you. Go ahead.
Okay, well, first of all, is it possible for a regime change implemented by Israeli stroke American or joint regime change? Could it do any good to the mass of the Iranian people? Anyone who thinks that hasn't been following recent history and hasn't seen what happened to each and every country in which the United States has instigated regime change. I mean, this applies to Iraq, to Afghanistan, to Libya, to Syria, and in Europe to Ukraine. Look at that and see what the consequences are. Anyone who hopes to get any good out of regime change instituted in this way from the outside by US/Israeli joint action simply hasn't been following the film so far. As to Amira's question, all indications are that the war against Gaza came to Israel unexpectedly and completely unplanned. And this was obvious. I mean, it has taken Israel completely by surprise. On the other hand, indications are that the present war that Israel is conducting in Lebanon has been planned a long time in advance. And in fact, Israeli commentators, I forget exactly who it was, probably Tzvi Barel, who said that precisely, I'm repeating what I said in my main talk, that Israel was taken by surprise, despite all information to the contrary, by what was planned in Gaza, because they were so focused on planning a war against Lebanon that their attention wasn't on the right place. As to Saudi Arabia, this is a very interesting question. Comrades might have noticed that, contrary to what the Gulf Emirates have done, joining the so-called Abrahamic agreements and so on, getting close to Israel in forming diplomatic relations, etc. Saudi Arabia has kept aloof from this. It hasn't opposed it. It hasn't come against it. Recently, I think today, I read in the paper that they are saying that they are not going to establish relations with Israel unless a Palestinian state is established, which means never, as things stand now. Now, the position of Saudi Arabia is unique in the following sense. On the one hand, it is economically, in terms of its oil reserves, etc., in terms of its religious position vis-a-vis Sunni Islam, the most important Arab country, right? I mean, I'm excluding Egypt, which is the largest Arab country in terms of population, etc., but is completely subservient to the United States. It's a semi-colony of the United States. Saudi Arabia has enough economic power and importance in other respects not to succumb to be a mere dependency of Israeli, a camp follower of Israeli hegemony. On the other hand, it is not big enough in terms of military power and so on to compete with Israel regional hegemony. It cannot aspire to the role that a country like Egypt could aspire to if it was differently led. It doesn't have the potential to this. So what Saudi Arabia is looking for is a kind of special relation of being not a mere tail of a poodle of Israeli hegemony in the Middle East, but not aspiring to a position of leadership. I think if you take keep this in mind, you can follow quite intelligently the actual game that Saudi Arabia is playing. What I've said is I think, a reasonable guide to understanding the position of Saudi Arabia. I may be mistaken, but this is my feeling about the position of Saudi Arabia. As for Adam's remarks, in an article that I published 12 years ago, I forecast an impending Israeli war against Iran, coupled with ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. But my view of the potential place for Palestinian ethnic cleansing was the West Bank, not Gaza. And I think the general feeling was that what is on the Israeli agenda is ethnic cleansing on the West Bank rather than Gaza. That again, Gaza was felt, I think, by Israeli planners deceptively. I think they were deceiving themselves as being quiescent, being dealt with, cut off in a concentration camp and under Israeli siege, and being, as it were, under control, being pacified by money coming from the Gulf, which Israel actually allowed and was the intermediate of purveying the subsidy from the Gulf to the Hamas regime in Gaza. The focus was on the West Bank. I think this, in the long term, this is the mainstream or the main idea or the main direction to look at as far as ethnic cleansing is concerned. It is not I mean, Gaza, I think, is more or less done. I mean, the northern half of the Gaza Strip is already ethnically cleansed. The population is concentrated in the south of the Gaza Strip. The fate is anybody's guess, but I think in the end, a lot of them will actually be allowed to die, and the rest will be somehow forced to leave either to the Sinai desert and or to the sea. I think that is that the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in Gaza is already well underway. After all, this is what the genocide is all about. I think the next if you like, the next stage of ethnically cleansing of the Palestinians will be in the West Bank. There are signs that Israel is actually applying greater pressure in this direction, both by direct military action. I mean, there was this bombing from the air, which is the first after many years that Israel has done such a thing, accompanied by constant harassment and ethnic cleansing in the salami method by Israeli settlers, accompanied by Israeli troops that are not protecting the victims of the pogroms, but protecting the pogromists who come to harm them. I think the second question raised by Adam is too complicated and that requires much too long an answer. What changes would be necessary in the program that he rightly attributed to Jabra, Nicola, and me. By the way, a lot of the ideas basically that I've been expressing for the last few decades, I owe a lot of them, the bulk of them, to this great Palestinian Marxist Jabra Nicola, who died in the early 1970s. That's my duty to express my indebtedness to this mentor of mine. But I think the short answer is that basically the program that we formulated a long time ago, basically, I mean, the first expression of it was in the 1960s, before the June War of '67. And elaborated later on. Basically, I stand by it. Reality has changed since then. And so, of course, in some important details, it has to be modified, but I think that it would take too long to actually address this point. So I apologize for not replying in detail to this question. Coming to Mike's points, I agree to most of what he said, but I think I would put it a little bit differently. It is not that now the Zionist project has a mother country, namely the United States. What I would qualify it as is that the United States has become the surrogate mother of the Zionist cause. This is the present surrogate mother. The Zionist project has had 3 successive surrogate mothers. The first was Britain, and the seal of this, as it were, arrangement was the Balfour Declaration. Secondly was France, which people forget about because it was a fairly short interval of time. It is true that the change came under Kennedy. That is absolutely true. That is to say, the change from Israel being a sort of a subcontractor of French imperialism to the United States orientation of Zionism came just during the Kennedy years, just before the June War of '67. By the time the June War came, Israel was already a protectorate of the United States, and I think saying that the change came under the Kennedy administration, I think is historically correct. It strikes me as it accords with what I remember from sort of living memory. The final point is, relating to Mike's questions, from the point of view of the United States, Israeli monopoly as a hegemon in the Middle East is not necessary. The United States would be quite satisfied if it had, in fact, probably would be a bit happier if it had 2 or 3 local, as it were, franchise holders. For Israel, it would be a demotion. So here, the interests, the long-term interests of the United States and those of Israel are not in complete agreement. There is a possible tension. How it might develop, I don't know. So far, Israel has had its own way. The last question was about, I think it was Ben, the Lebanese army. The Lebanese army is a non-entity. That is to say, it is powerless. I mean, compared to Hezbollah, the Lebanese army is not a serious actor. Just as the Lebanese state is broken down. The state is broken down, and this allows Hezbollah to, on the political level, to act as a state within a state, because the actual Lebanese state is broken down, and the same applies on the military level to the Lebanese army.
Thank you very much, Moshe. I have 2 other people, and then you can summarize as well. So, Virginia, are you still intending to speak? Your hand fell, but I had seen you before turning.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of reasons, but I made this point at the last previous Sunday. Obviously, Moshé wasn't speaking then, but on just some level, it would seem to me that if the United States was to withdraw military support from Israel, I mean, it just seems so obvious to me the kind of powder keg that would set off in terms of, other repressed people in other countries. Just that would be such a signal for rebellion. I mean, that's not what the United States wants. I mean, things are at such a crazy pitch now. Who knows what's going to happen next year? But I mean, at that very basic level, they do not want to encourage les autres. They don't want people to join with that move and rebel against their countries. They don't want that, and they certainly don't want that. Yeah. Anyway, so maybe Moshé can speak to that point. Yeah.
Okay, Tony Greenstein, second time.
Yes, Moshé misunderstood my point about Suez. I mean, anyone who's read, for instance, James Ball's Lords of the Desert will be aware of the intrigues and the competition between US and British imperialism in particular. And of course, Suez was the final death knell for any independent British foreign policy in the Middle East or indeed anywhere in the world. And that was the birth of the independence, so-called independent nuclear deterrent, Polaris, as it was then. But I was specifically focusing on Israel because of the context of its relationship with the United States. And Eisenhower specifically instructed Israel on pain of loss of the $100 million subsidy that the United States was already giving to Israel. It had to withdraw because Ben-Gurion was extremely reluctant. Mapam, amongst others, held demonstrations against withdrawal. So Israel withdrew extremely reluctantly, but it was instructed by the United States. And that really was my main point. In terms of the whole scenario, I think in the sense Moshé was somewhat pessimistic. And I think we have to look at it in the context of a weakening of US power, imperialism's power internationally. Because what Gaza has shown is in many ways the weakness of the Israeli state. It could not have conducted the war it has done, but for the continuous military supplies of the United States, not only military supplies, but of course, all the intelligence and so on and so forth. And yet, despite that, they haven't defeated Hamas. Hamas is still active. It's still in control of most of the local government in Gaza. And I'm not at all sure that Israel will be able to complete its ethnic cleansing, not least because of the tenacity of the Palestinians themselves who don't want to leave. And secondly, because Israel may not be in a position to impose its will in that respect, not least counting international factors such as Egypt's reluctance, the fact that no other country would want to take Palestinians and so on. But the question also rebounds in terms of the confrontation with Iran and also Hezbollah, because Israel has now signaled its determination to conduct a war in Lebanon. It's started with the massive bombing sorties that we're seeing at the present time. But Israel knows full well that however massive the bombing, it has to go in on the ground if it's going to gain and hold territory. And my own view, and I may be proved wrong, but time will tell, is that Israel is going to find it extremely difficult to recolonize South Lebanon, given the experience and the ability of the Hezbollah fighters on the ground who know the territory, unlike the Israeli soldiers, to actually win that war. And that will be quite crucial. In any event, its confrontation with Iran poses it with a whole series of problems because it will, or it's very likely to lead to a regional war. We should not forget the United States has, if you like, two wars, both Ukraine and in the Middle East, and it's not doing particularly well in Ukraine, and it's making extremely heavy weather in the Middle East via Israel. Israel wants to be the hegemon of the Middle East, but there's no certainty that it can carry it out. And although there are these biblical dreams of expansion, colonization isn't just driven by ideology. The idea that Israel can expand indefinitely seems to be absolutely ludicrous. The question I think that is posed is whether we are beginning to see the end game of Zionism itself. It's actually fulfilled its historic mission, not least in terms of the internal divisions within Israel between two polar opposites amongst the settler population. Those who wish to normalize the Israeli state, but as a Jewish supremacist state, but a normalized bourgeois state, and those who wish to continue until the very bitter end. And that was playing out clearly before the Gaza operation, but hasn't died away. And the fact that Netanyahu has, in essence, abandoned the hostages is causing immense ructions within Israel. So there are all sorts of contradictions which are playing out. And I don't think Israel is, if you like, has a winning hand necessarily, because reliance on military power alone, when you are unable to state your political objectives, poses certain problems. It's posed it in Gaza. Israel's been fighting that war for 1 year. And whenever it leaves an area, Hamas regains control. And Hamas is taking considerable casualties. When Israel claims it's lost 300 odd soldiers killed, but I think we can multiply that by a factor of 10. It's certainly not the case that it's 300. I mean, Moshé signals that he disagrees with me, but I think it is far, far higher, just like the Iranian rocket attack in the last week caused far greater damage than Israel is letting on. There is very strict military censorship as to what damage was caused in the bases. So I think there is also grounds for optimism that Israel's power, I believe, is waning, which is partly why Saudi Arabia has backed off, because it actually sees that Israel is actually getting stuck in the ground and isn't being able to impose its will in the way it wants. Thank you.
Okay, Moshé, I give you time to answer and sum up. I don't see any other hands. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. First of all, as to Ginny's question, I don't think withdrawal of support from the United States, support of Israel by the United States, a complete withdrawal, cut off, as it were, is on the cards. There is no reason for the United States to do it. It may be that the United States is going to modify to some extent its support to Israel. That is to say, turn the dial a little bit towards a sort of less support. That is possible. As I said, I don't want to speculate about what is going to happen, but this is a logical possibility. Now, again, coming to what happened in the Suez War. First of all, let us not forget that it was not just Eisenhower, but the United States, together with the Soviet Union, who forced the three aggressors to withdraw. I think focusing on Israel in this respect is a little bit, to misjudge the focus of this. What really annoyed the United States was the attempt of these two second-rate, third-rate imperialisms to act independently without even notifying them. That was the main point. And when France and Britain were told in no uncertain terms to withdraw from what they occupied in the Suez campaign, what Israel had to do was a foregone conclusion. It was not mainly about Israel. In fact, the United States would have been quite satisfied for Israel to act as it did if it was acting under United States supervision and permission. What annoyed, what really angered Eisenhower was the attempts of these have been imperialisms to show independent initiative. That was unacceptable. And this was the point of the position of the United States. It was not mainly about Israel. Israel has not defeated Hamas in Gaza. everybody was saying that Israel was not able to overthrow Hamas, that defeating Hamas was an impossible aim. And this was not the real aim. This is the propaganda aim, one of the two propaganda aims of this war. The official, as far as Netanyahu was concerned, if you ask him, the aim of the war was to defeat Hamas and to get the hostages free. None of these was the real aim. The real aim was ethnic cleansing. It became clear. And whereas Israel has not defeated Hamas and is not going to defeat Hamas, whether it's going to actually accomplish ethnic cleansing of Gaza is still an open question. I don't want to speculate about this. I said I wasn't I wasn't going to speculate because I'm averse to speculating without any reasonable grounds for the speculation. As for Tony's guess that there are more Israeli soldiers killed in Gaza than being admitted, this is in Israel impossible. It is possible to hide the number of injured. That is possible because you don't have to arrange burials for the people injured in hospitals. So the number of Israeli soldiers injured lying in hospital may be much more than Israel is admitting. Israel can hide the damage that the Iranian missiles did to it, but to hide the number of and the exact names of Israeli soldiers killed in action, this in the conditions of Israel as a small country in which everybody knows everybody else almost, is simply impossible. Tony is actually engaged in wishful thinking. Finally, it is possible that the Israeli society is going to implode from within, but be careful what you are wishing for. If that happens, it is going to be a major catastrophe for everyone in the region. The Palestinian liberation movement is not in a state to actually get the benefit of a collapse of the Israeli state. It will lead, the likely outcome of a collapse of the Israeli state in the present conditions may be a catastrophe worse than the present situation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Moshé, for this talk. And as I've said before, we will have a Farsi version of this on Wednesday. So I hope some comrades, those who, it will be in English with Farsi subtitles. So I hope comrades will join us. Once again, many thanks for your talk. And it was very informative. All the best, comrades.
Thank you for this session, which was instructive for me as well.
Thank you. Bye.